district attorneys who prosecute the offenders. I sound like the Law and Order intro. But yes, we work very closely with them then. But yes, oftentimes we say to them, no, there's not enough to arrest here. We have that type of relationship. Oftentimes, all of the cases that we present to a grand jury involve a police witness of some sort. We work with them on a regular basis. There are some cases that go through grand jury that get no billed, 392 last year, 2014. So yes, we have a working relationship, but it's a working relationship where we disagree. And our role as district attorneys is to seek justice. We can't always agree with the police. We have to support the community, and we've got to do what's right in every particular case. As I say to every single one of the DAs who work underneath me, you have to look at each case on its own merits. It's important to the community, it's important to the witness, it's important to the victim, and it's equally as important to the defendant. And you've got to do what is right for all of those parties in each particular case. And if you want to, do the math, close to 5,000 felonies and close to 20,000 misdemeanors, we are obligated to the community to do that in every single case, because a murder is just as important as a petty arson.
I guess I meant in the case of a homicide, of a fatality.
And in those cases, if we feel that we have too close of a relationship, that's a case where we have the ability to ask for the special prosecutor under county law.
My son was indicted for arson by a lie. The only way that we could have avoided the indictment was if we had an open court where we were able to question the witness and present our own witnesses. When the district attorney found out that the lie was told, he covered it up. And I think that there is nothing really to be gained by having the grand jury secret, except in special cases where I suppose a judge, if he were in charge, could grant secrecy. But most cases, I believe, like in Ferguson, if the question. How would you open it up to take care of a situation like a malicious prosecution, which was what my son had? New York State does not have a way to deal with it right now, because you depend on the district attorney to turn it over to the attorney general or something like that.
Mr. Langdon and I spoke yesterday. I came in and spoke to him in another group from this congregation. And, my heart goes out to you and what your family suffered. I would hope that if that had occurred, and this occurred back in 1980-something, correct? Yeah. If that had occurred in Monroe County, that we have judges such as Judge Van Buren who would have reviewed those minutes, who would have found that the evidence was not legally sufficient, and who would have set aside that indictment. I would hope that that would be what would happen today in Monroe County.
The judge wouldn't have known it was a lie.
Just slightly or totally off subject, but to give you an idea of to what extremes this idea of grand jury secrecy is carried. And I'm looking around and I see a lot of gray hair, so I'm in my crowd here. How many people remember the Attica uprising? Okay, I was in college. I was a young man. Just last year, 42 years after the Attica uprising, the Attorney General's office sought to have released not the grand jury minutes themselves, but two portions of a report called the Meyer Report that was critical of the way that the prosecution handled the Attica charges. And the judge would not allow the release of those reports because they contained transcripts of testimony of witnesses from 42 years ago, most of whom have passed on, not in any danger of any type of retaliation or anything else. The law in New York is so extreme on this issue of grand jury secrecy, and there's nothing that shows it any more than saying you can't release testimony of witnesses from 42 years ago because we have to protect witnesses from retaliation. It's absurd.
Good evening. My question is, does it have to be a unanimous vote by the grand jury whether to indict or not to indict?
No, it doesn't have to be. With the grand jury, it's 23 members, 16 make up a quorum. You need at least 12 for a bill.
Brenda asked a question before about the time frames of 3 weeks, 6 weeks and 3 days. And then he had another question that said, and I'm going to say this question, is when a person starts in this 6 weeks or 3 weeks process with a case, it doesn't seem like they end with that case if it goes on for 3 or 4 years or a long time frame. My question is, when they start,
let me say that part. You were talking about that there is a grand jury vote and there's a grand jury rising.
Yes.
Now, if I sat on the grand jury vote of an indictment, would I still be the same person at the end of when that actual case is going to actually be brought up for an indictment?
Yes, you must be on, yes.
The rising has to come up during that 4-week period.
It's got to come up during that 4 weeks.
Right.
Okay.
There are situations where the district attorney is allowed to pull the case from the grand jury before a vote. There may have been some witness that became unavailable at the last minute. So the district attorney could have started a presentation with your grand jury, but before it was voted, decide, I want to pull this case from your consideration, I want to withdraw it from your consideration, and then they can present it again to a different grand jury if all of the witnesses are there. But once the grand jury has voted, if they vote to no bill, to dismiss the charges, the district attorney can't re-present it again unless they make a showing to a court that some new evidence has occurred or there was some tampering with the grand jury or some very serious reason why they should be allowed to re-present the case.
now, my question is to protect the integrity of the process and the people in the process, how do you also hold down the cost for the community?
And that's, I don't have attorneys. I'm trying to get my job fired.
To protect it,
Thank you, go ahead. Go ahead.
the question I have is, we want to protect the process, we want to give everyone due process, we also want to protect the community. But my question is, how do we control the costs? Because he said, Mr. Brazil said that we have to make a decision about which cases can be seen by by seasoned attorneys as opposed to non-seasoned attorneys. So how do we protect the cost of that for the community as well, as we make sure that justice is served?
Right, and you know what, justice comes with a very heavy price tag.
Yeah, it
You
does.
know, if you want to go back to, let me go back to the word plea bargaining. You know, some people think plea bargaining is a dirty word, but it's not, it can't be. And Roger, you would agree with me on that one, correct? Come on, just give me
Let the record reflect.
Because if you take that 4,700 felonies that, and the 20,000 misdemeanors that come through on one given year, that would clog up the courts. Judge Pampiano, you would not be a happy judge. The system can't hold it. So, you know, we've got to prioritize the cases that we can all agree on. And actually, Roger and I have had cases together. We've had a meeting of the minds where we agree as to what the charge should be. A judge would agree to it. We would agree what the sentence should be. And that case quickly, you know, gets moved through the system. But it's only those 1,400 maybe that are indicted every year that actually are in contest. And those are the ones we need to focus on to make sure the system does the money.
I want to direct this question to Roger. It's my understanding that the only way the grand jury process can be changed right now is by the state legislature doing something. So can you speak to a little bit about what partisan politics might play in terms of how that's going to turn out and whether anything will actually happen?
Let me be clear, just in case I wasn't, that the right to grand jury indictment in New York State is guaranteed by the New York State Constitution. So any reform has to start with the premise that there's going to be a grand jury. You can't, the legislature cannot abolish the right to grand jury. Fair? So what can you do? As I indicated, there are a number of different proposals. I commend to you to read this article. If you can get access to the New York Law Journal. Oh, it's actually older than I thought. January 15th, 2015. It's called Grand Jury Practice, Protests, and Reform. And it goes a little bit through the history of grand juries, talks about the stuff that I talked about, talks about this whole concept of secrecy, talks about the various proposals that are now being laid before the legislature in New York for different types of reform. And it actually makes its own conclusions as to what the best reforms would be. It's a very concise, it's only 25 pages, but it's big, large type. Reader's Digest, large type. It is a very informative article if you want to know what the legislature is thinking about. Obviously, in any of these, if one of these proposals has to be dubbed the favorite, the one that the governor is making part of his budget bill has got to be considered a favorite, because if it stays in the governor's budget and the budget is passed, it gets passed along with it. The other proposals have varying degrees of support and opposition, and it's one of those wait and see things, as with anything with Albany. We won't know what will come out of it until June.
And if I could just say it briefly. I believe the sense is around the state that there will be some change. So we can expect it. It just what that change will be is yet to be determined. It's Criminal Procedure Law Section 190 that they would look to amend to change the provisions or the rules regarding the grand jury. But I would suspect, maybe Roger would even agree with me on this one, there will be change.
Write it down.
That's twice.
possible felony, and I guess I'm interested in how, if there are guidelines or how the decision is made as to whether that will go to a Supreme Court grand jury or whether that would go to a federal grand jury. And then once, or whether once it's decided and or it might, as an indictment, how is it decided what court it might be tried?
Violations of the U.S. Code, the federal statute, go to a federal grand jury and they get tried by the United States attorneys in the federal courthouse. The penal law is the New York State compilation of laws, and crimes that occur under the penal law would get submitted to a Monroe County grand jury. If an indictment is handed up, let me talk about this rising, but it's really no special thing. It just means, the grand jury takes a vote. The prosecutors are not in the room when the grand jury votes, so we leave the room. There's a 4-person and a clerk in the grand jury. I've never been in there, but they take their vote. We come back in, we ask what the vote is. If it's a bill, perhaps we file a certification, as Roger discussed, to stop the clock on the felony matter. And then within the 4 weeks, perhaps, we draft up the indictment. The indictment comes to me, I sign it and read every single indictment that is handed up. It then gets reviewed by a judge. If the judge has to sign an arrest warrant or a prosecutor's information or a release of a defendant in custody because of a no bill, and then it gets filed on the 5th floor, and then it gets filed in the clerk's office. That's the rising. Then there's a magical, maybe Judge Pampiano should speak to this, a magical wheel, how cases get assigned?
The clerk randomly assigns them to the 11 criminal court judges, one at a time. That's where this phrase wheel comes from, like Your Honor Ferris with the next one in line.
Right. And that would be all of the county court judges that have criminal jurisdiction and the Supreme Court judges that handle criminal matters.
We have time for one more.
I have heard in general that there's some feeling in parts of the community that in fact the people on the grand jury may not constitute a jury of the peers of the people who are accused. And my question is very simple, I'm sure any of you can answer it. What is the area of the jury pool here? I've been on jury duty many times and I seem to see people coming from Trumansburg or wherever. And is the grand jury drawn from the same pool as the jury pool?
Grand jurors and regular trial jurors are both gleaned from the same pool of potential jurors, and that is anybody in Monroe County. Anybody who hasn't served on a jury within the past 6 years, and anybody who doesn't have a prior felony conviction on their record, and anybody that speaks and understands English. Those are the requirements of jury service. If you've served on a jury within the last 6 years, you're not allowed to serve again. If you don't speak and understand English, you can't serve. If you've been convicted of a felony, you don't serve. If you don't live in the county, you can't serve in this county.
So the 8-county judicial area
That's
is not...
the federal grand jury.
Oh, okay.
That's-
Well, I've been
that's
on
the
a couple
source
of different juries.
That's the source of your confusion.
Okay.
The federal grand jury draws from a much, much wider area. Monroe County grand juries and trial juries are just from the county.
Thank you.
The only sort of distinction here is that in each of the other remember I talked about all the different town courts? They also have their misdemeanor trials in their courts. And the jurors are picked from that town, just that town. But if the trial is in Rochester City Court, the jury pool is not just citizens of the city of Rochester, it is citizens of the entire Monroe County. So obviously, minority representation on those juries is greatly diluted on those juries because the demographics of the city are certainly different than the demographics of the county as a whole, and that is reflected in the grand jury, in the jury pools.
Let us thank. I do want to say that, what they have done really is over and above their job descriptions. And, they've shown us that, they are not only knowledgeable, but we get what we pay for. I'll turn this over to the League of Women Voters, and let us acknowledge the League of Women Voters.
Thank you all for joining us for this important discussion. We got a lot of information here tonight. We are very, very grateful to our moderator, Reverend Lawrence Harwood, and our excellent panel, Sandra Dorley and Roger Brazil, and who shared their time and their expertise. I mean, this was a wonderful, wonderful program. Thank you. We would also like to thank Asbury First United Methodist Church for their continuing support for our forums. And as many of you know, we present a forum almost every month, focusing on issues which impact our community. We hope to see you on Monday, April 27th at 7 p.m. at the First Unitarian Church on South Winton Road, when we will be discussing the challenges facing the Affordable Health Care Act. Am I right with that, Jen? Yeah, okay, great. Before you leave, we have a new brochure hot off the press. It's the Who Represents You. I think many of you know about this guide. It's a guide to your elected officials for Monroe County. So this is the 2015 edition. So please stop at our table. We have copies there. If you need any, call our League of Women Voters telephone number and leave a message.
Gloria, is it on the website as well?
And it's on the website. It will be on the website. I'm not sure if it's there now, but it will be on the website. Okay, well, thank you so much, and feel free to enjoy the